You are listening to Wicked Psychotherapists, a podcast where two psychotherapists show you that taking care of and learning about mental health doesn't have to be wicked hard.
So today we have a really cool topic to talk about. We thought this was fun. It's a Netflix series called Unstable that stars Rob Lowe and his real life son. His real life son's name is John Owen, I believe. And we thought this would be, there's a lot of father-son dynamics, some mental health themes in there. We just thought it would be a cool little discussion today. It's kind of interesting. So I think, maybe just kind of to dive in there, how did you find the series overall? Because there's only one season so far. There is possibly a season 2. It's been kind of put on hold from the writer's strike, but how did you find it overall?
Well, I love Rob Lowe, because of our 80s tie-in, everything goes back to the 80s. And it's funny, I was thinking when I knew we were doing this episode, I was like, didn't we just talk about Rob Lowe recently? And we talked about like how, I don't know, there's just something great about him. But
We never talked too much about Rob Lowe.
I know. It's funny. I even started watching his game show. He has a game show called, I think it's called The Floor.
Yeah, I watched that too.
Really good. But I liked it. I really wasn't sure what I was coming into or what it was going to be about at first, because it's like, oh, well, the description is like narcissistic father, whatever it says, grieving and relationship with son. So you don't know exactly what it's going to be about or how it's going to be portrayed. But I found it really funny. And also, I don't know, I thought it was pretty, I know it seemed really out there, but I felt like it was kind of realistic too, with somebody dealing with grief and not really coming to terms with it, and also trying to navigate being a parent and also your relationship with your children, or even having a relationship with your children.
Yeah, it's interesting. There are a lot of dynamics there with the main character, Ellis. And spoiler alert, there's going to be a lot. If you haven't watched this, then you'll know all about it.
Right.
So you all know that just, with our Netflix specials.
We do have other streaming channels besides just Netflix, but we tend to always,
I don't know, for some reason it just hooks us. But yeah, we do look at other things. Maybe that's something we should look at in the future, is something from a different
go to
streaming
Prime or Apple. Yeah.
But yeah, the father-son relationship, I mean, it's a strained one. The father, Ellis, played by Rob Lowe, is very much this eccentric biotechnologist who's invented this type of plastic that's biodegradable. He has this company. He's looking for like his next great breakthrough, but he's also dealing with the death of his wife of 30 something years.
Mm-hmm.
And he's kind of, they first portray him as kind of being a little bit, maybe off his rocker. He's kind of doing some odd things. He's showing up and, kind of being, naked in his office kind of thing. So they're like, okay, we don't know if they're going to keep him on the board. And then if this company's going to stay afloat, all the people that work around him. So they're all trying to help him stay stable, quote unquote. And so they look to bring in his son, who is, I believe, in New York. Was it?
Yeah, I think he was in New York, and I don't know if he was in an orchestra or something like that, having a full-time job.
I think he was just like a flute teacher. Like he just kind of like taught private lessons, sort of. At least that's what, I don't know. That's all they said. But he's like totally in a different world. He's not, he does this very niche job of like teaching flute. And, it's kind of like in opposite worlds. He's, actually an opposite kind of size of the country. And they know that he's someone that can help ground his father, the people around Ellis. So they bring Jackson, the son, which is Rob Lowe's real life son, in there. And it kind of causes a lot of tension in trying to talk about their, shared grief in the loss of the wife and the mother. So it creates some interesting dynamics there. And you kind of start to realize that there is a larger than life role that Ellis, the father, plays, and the son feels kind of ousted from this and kind of in his shadow. And, even in his occupation as a flutist, and kind of just teaching lessons, he's not really in the spotlight too much. And his dad is very idealistic, always trying to save the world. And people are always drawn into his orbit.
Right.
So it's kind of also a lot of those dynamics all together. And I wonder, what was your take on their relationship? What did you think about that?
Well, it seemed like they probably, I don't know if they didn't ever have a relationship before, because maybe the mother kind of softened the relationship between the two of them. That's what I was getting at, because maybe both Ellis and Jackson had relationships with the mother. And so they never had to have relationships together. Either it was always all of them together, or she was with Jackson, or she was with Ellis. So they never really had to figure out how the two of them fit together without her.
That's a good point. Yeah, they never really had to navigate a father-son relationship, and it probably because of the difficulties that were presented. And yeah, the mom was probably like a buffer and also acted as, okay, you can have a relationship with me and, separately, and that kind of solved that. But yeah, her death definitely caused them to take a look at that. And it seems like Jackson, the son, he is someone who kind of has to emotionally caretake dad, Ellis, and he has to kind of look out for him. But then you also see Jackson struggle with the fact that everyone that's around him is always kind of asking about his dad. Like, oh, you're Ellis's son? He's more Ellis's son than Jackson himself.
Right.
And so he has his own struggles with that. And he really wants to return back to his life in New York, but, his father convinces him to stay, and everybody else does, because he wants him to have a place in the biotech company.
Well, they all start, spoilers, but they all start, I think, originally wanting Jackson to stay for selfish reasons, for the company's reason. But his father actually wants him to stay because realizing, like, wait a minute, we need to have this relationship, or, I'm feeling more human or normalized with you around. And, it could be, seeing your child who, the parent that, they were married for like 30 something years, and it could be difficult too at first having him around. And maybe that's why it's like, wait a minute, he lived all the way in New York. He wasn't really pushing him to come back to California until they spent some time together and realized we don't know each other, or let's build this relationship.
Yeah, that's really true. I mean, because I think Jackson, the son, almost seems to have not grieved either. Like, he's very much, I wouldn't say repressed, but he doesn't really seem to want to connect with his dad because they've never really had that connection. And he also probably has a little bit of resentment because of his larger than life personality.
Right.
And I think Rob Lowe's character, Ellis, is really acting out the grief in strange ways. Like, he's trying to kind of, it comes off very eccentric, but it's his own way of working through this as a person who's used to kind of just moving through life and being larger than life and having, kind of all the answers and all the people kind of come to him and things kind of working out.
Yeah.
And he doesn't quite know what to do. So they're both lost in that, but they can't quite connect on it at first.
Yeah. Well, grief is something that you can't plan for. Even if you've, like a lot of times people, like when someone's going to pass away, you might have like anticipatory grief, or, like, okay, well, I'm going to plan it, or I know this is happening. But even once it happens, it's so individualized. You've never experienced this before. You don't know, even if you've lost somebody in the past for a different situation, but each person, each relationship you have with somebody is so unique, and you don't know how you're going to feel, or how you're going to experience, or how you're going to react, or how those around you are going to react, or how you're supposed to react, or, show up for everybody.
Yeah. And that's kind of the whole, I think the whole central theme is making sure Ellis is stable enough to run this company, to keep this company going, to continue to support all the jobs of the people that are working there. But, also to continue this mission of like saving the world with all these, turning carbon into concrete, and also absorbing some of the carbon dioxide, if something like that. I don't know, but something really important to preserve those things. And instead, no one, I think, is really looking at it as all these people around him that are trying to preserve him and kind of make sure he's stable. They're not really looking at, well, he's got grief and he actually probably might not be stable. And how do you manage that?
Yeah.
They did get him a therapist who he saw once and then disappeared. And we find out that Ellis has kind of kidnapped him and kept him in his basement, but the therapist seems to like it there. It really seems to bond with him. And it's a very nice, like furnished, really nice area,
it's probably something he couldn't afford on his therapy salary anytime. Yeah. So and then there's a lot of manipulation, unethical behavior from the therapist too. We thought, like it's not hopefully what you would see in most therapy settings. But he does get kidnapped, but it almost seems like a willing participant towards the end.
Yeah, because when he gets to leave, he ends up coming back, right? And they have like Sundays and stuff, and he's like kind of got this weird friendship bond with him, and which is strange considering what happens at the end.
Right.
But, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah. So, and also, at this point, Jackson is kind of, he ends up staying and working in the company. He's trying to find like his niche. He has a date with one of the scientists that are working in the red lab, I think. Ruby realizes that's not really a connection. And at the end, he realizes there might be a connection with the other scientist that's working in the lab because they're kind of more quirky, kind of things that he probably was not, as you pointed out, probably were not as acceptable for him to kind of look for in a partner with his dad. Or maybe he didn't want that kind of eccentricity that was kind of like his dad. Maybe he was trying to just be kind of straight and narrow to kind of oppose him.
Yeah, because his father's, maybe in the past, like the people he chose to date or commit to or whatever he probably felt like they had to look a certain way or career-wise a certain level, since his father is probably someone that people look up to and has a certain reputation. It was probably difficult being the son of Ellis.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, there's a lot of kind of dynamics that go into that. But Jackson seems to come into his own and kind of realize what is, or at least walk towards it a little bit more. And, Ellis is a little bit of a different story with how he's kind of trying to grieve, trying to kind of make the latest breakthrough, and then also trying to be with his son, maybe at sometimes in more connective ways, other times not so much. But I was wondering, do you at all have any kind of personal stories that you feel like you can relate to this dynamic, or anything that you want to talk about that can shed a little bit of light on this?
Yeah, I mean, I know I've shared that my mother passed away. And when I was watching this, and I talked to Tanya and we always talk about how we do like a pre-game show, like before, like pre-game parking lot party. So we always talk a little bit before. And I told her, like, when I first watched the show, I was shocked or taken aback at how much it felt familiar to me, because my parents were married for 35 years when my mom passed away. And after my mom passed away, my dad found like some information on to join the Peace Corps, and he ended up doing the whole process of joining the Peace Corps and was gone for, I think, about 2 years. And then he did some traveling, then re-enlisted somewhere else, but where he was really far. He was like in Tonga, and then he went to Vanuatu. I always say he was doing this Survivor tour, all past Survivor episodes. But it was difficult because then, we lost our mother, and then we, in a sense, lost our father too, because we couldn't really communicate with him while he was gone, because there's not really, he didn't have access to email or phone calls where he was located. So it would be sporadically if he was in a location, if he went to a location that had it, or, letters took a lot longer. So it was difficult, like during that period. And then when there was the reconnection, I also felt with Jackson, because when my mother was alive, there was a lot of I don't want to say like I didn't have a relationship with my dad, but it was more with my mom. Like it was almost like my mom and dad had a relationship. And then I felt like it was like we had a relationship with my dad, but it was never just I had a relationship with my dad. Like I never really felt like there was I knew who he was, but I didn't really know him as a person, as an individual, as my parent, as a lot of people have the memories or oh yeah, my dad likes this or that. And it's like, I didn't really know, I knew facts about him, but I didn't really know who he was. And so I did not know who my dad was until even when he came back from his Peace Corps, like after he'd been gone for a few years and he came back, it was like reintroducing myself to him because he had left. And I think it, like looking back, it's been over 20 years since my mom passed away. So looking back, I know that this was his way of grieving because they were very much in love. And like, even though it was like a little crazy at time, like I always say it was like, like Lucy and Ricky Ricardo sometimes, like just like it's very nutty sometimes. But I think for him to process, because he's not a big emotional person where you're going to be like, oh, let me wear it all in my sleeves. It's very pragmatic, and so I think it was important for him to do this. And it was very different than his character with my mom because they weren't like joining the Peace Corps together. Also, it helped me when he came back, because I did have a little bit of, I don't know if it was resentment, but I did have a little bit of, I did have resentment when he was gone because I was a little bit annoyed at first that he left, that he sold the house we lived in, that he got rid of all her stuff. And it was just like to process. I think for him is to help process, but I felt like Jackson too. It's like, wait a minute. It was like, I lost my mom and I know you lost your wife. But, what about me? What about us? My siblings. What
about your role as a father and grief.
Yeah. So it's like, you're just, and it's hard for me not to think like it was kind of selfish because he had kids and it was, we weren't children, but we still were kids, we're still his kids, like it's just, but so it did feel almost like we were being abandoned to grieve my mom with each other. And we're all scattered. My siblings are all scattered different states. And to try to figure this out, like, and we've never done this before. We never lost a parent before. My dad never lost a spouse before. So it would have I guess it would have been healthier, like in some sense if we all came together. But I think we all were forced to grieve separate. And then years later, we did come together. And my dad, years later, said talked about his grief and how going did help him grieve and how, it just took up till just a few years ago that I started seeing pictures of her in his house again. I think it was just too difficult for him. And I think it was just almost too difficult to say, I lost this person who I love so much. But never really saying how did that affect you guys? That must have been really difficult too.
He didn't connect with you on as a parent to say, how was this loss for you? Instead, he kind of was processing it as self, but not really in a parental way.
Yeah.
His role. And I mean, it may have been tough for him, but it was tough for you as well. Not having that connection or support, not even having the possibility of it.
Yeah. Because that's we had a relationship with her and, and I know he did too. And some of it was the same and some was different. And it's just, and so I did very much relate to both characters. And I think that's why when I was watching this, I'm like, wow, this isn't just a comedy for me. I'm really getting all the feelings while I'm watching this show because they're talking about, compound grief, the different relationships with parents and children. And it was just really a lot that I was like, whoo, I haven't unpacked all this. And so it really felt very familiar to me.
Yeah, understandably. I mean, that definitely sounds like, kind of reconnecting with a parent who has to process in their own way. And you have to almost kind of understand that, which is kind of a reversal of, the parent understanding the child, right? And kind of taking on that role. And so I think that very much is comparable to Ellis and Jackson, with the way Jackson, when he comes back, he's just he's got to kind of ground everything. He's got to try and figure something out.
Yeah.
But then you also see points where Ellis is trying to, he thinks he's trying to help Jackson grieve by being it's kind of pointed out to him oh, he might need help as well. And he's trying all these ways that are not very helpful, like with the peanut butter and, how his mom's the last batch. And he's like, you just don't want to because it's too sad. And he's kind of trying to connect, but not really in an organic way.
Yeah. And no, it's another thing too, is the getting to know your parent too. Cause it's I feel like now, I mentioned it's been over 20 years but now I notice that I'm starting to get to know my dad. Like I'll talk to him on the phone or something, not just like, hey, okay, talk to you later. But now it's actually like having.
Imagine him hearing that and being like, that's what I sound like.
Yeah. I said no. But it is, but now it's actually having conversations.
Such a dad, though.
But we're laughing and, it's like just actually having conversations, which is so nice. And it's, sometimes, of course, he still aggravates the heck out of me. But I think it is a lot because I didn't know him for, a big chunk of my life. Yeah. He lived there. He was, he was a present father, but his relationship was more with my mom than it was with me for a lot of it. And I think that was also my mom's doing. My mom was very, I think we've talked about that. Like my mom was very much into, her.
Yeah. She was kind of, the center was her.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, we could definitely devote hours and hours to that. We might one day. We might just kind of go all for it.
Mothers.
Yeah, that would just be, Mother's Day is coming up right now. But yeah, maybe not this year. But and I think that's really interesting because you wonder what was it about Ellis's wife and Jackson's mom, that maybe she kind of noticed that they were inherently different. Maybe there was something else. We don't really know. There's not really an indication of that, but there was something that, kind of buffered them with her presence. And with that gone, and it's interesting because I actually just thought of this. Her best friend comes back, Jean, and she ultimately is again, big spoiler alert, but Jean is the one who is behind. She's on the board and she's sent there under the guise of trying to help or just be with Jackson. And really, she's trying to get Ellis off the board.
Right.
And I'm wondering if that is maybe some form of connection with the mom. Like maybe she feels like that would have been what her best friend would have wanted, Ellis's ex-wife, or I don't know, because it's not really clear.
I was actually thinking she was almost feeling like it was her, not responsibility, but her right to take, because, we're best friends. So now what was hers was mine in a sense. So I have the right to make the decisions. I get the right to, have this relationship with her son and do, take over. So that's what I was, but I could have been watching it completely with different lenses.
No, I mean, it very well could have been. I really don't know. Like, I'm kind of interested if anybody else has any takes on that, because I was a little bit, and I know there's supposed to be the season 2, so maybe we'll find out about that, but I don't know if it was, maybe she was just a very selfish kind of person and just kind of felt entitled to all of this. She did ultimately end up hurting Jackson as well, because she came there under the guise of being close to him. And ultimately she was just trying to get her dad out, so it was, she's very kind of selfish and sneaky in that regard.
Yeah. And then you wonder too, was she ever best friends with this person, or was she best friends with this person and she's grieving and she's not really sure, this was her best friend. Again, every single person that we interact with that, like has a different relationship with, with somebody.
That's so true. Yeah.
It's, so who knows? I'd like to believe that she is good, but we don't know.
Yeah. And I guess, like you said, like every person is kind of acting possibly from points of view of grief, even though it comes off as eccentric, unstable, weird, selfish, all these other like distant, whatever it is.
Anxious. Like, Jackson has a lot of anxiety and it shows up different ways. But people, you don't know. Grief shows up so many different ways.
Yeah, that may kind of be a takeaway from this. Like I'm always trying to find takeaways, even though I know we're just discussing. But to me, it kind of seems like after just discussing this, it just kind of occurs to me how many different points of view and how many different possible reactions to grief there really was that could have just been misinterpreted as someone's character.
Yeah, because it's not just the typical stages of grief. And I know a lot of people think like, okay, well, was I angry? Was I sad? Was I resentful? Was I bargaining? Not everyone goes through that.
Yeah.
Some people just act like everything's fine. It's fine. Then they might have like a huge reaction like years later or months later because it still shows up. Or they might get depressed, or they might get anxious. They might just sit in the room and cry with Patsy Cline playing, looking at old pictures. Or they might just, like process it. They might talk to a therapist. They might exercise a lot. You don't know what everyone's going through just because they might look okay on the outside, or they might look unstable.
Right. And I think that's the point of this, is to show that. Although Ellis does not give a great ending to this, because at the end, he is able to save his position in the company. He, has his breakthrough. And so that ultimately secures his place in the company. And he immediately fires Jean, the friend who tried to get him off. And which is, I mean, that's understandable. But then there's a scene where he is blowing up her car. And so it's not really great. That's a very much an overreaction. So there's a lot of stuff going on with him, but we don't really know. There's just all these different perspectives on how people are managing.
And again, it's a show. We're not supporting this. We're not, that's not a proper way to grieve, but I did like, though, that he did start talking about his wife, and they both talked about like their mother and their wife and, the relationship, and that they were grieving and connecting. Yeah. And connecting. And it's funny because the connection was, they both really said Jean was portraying both of them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And I mean, I wonder if there is, if there is the season 2 that comes out, if there's going to be more of a development with Jackson and possibly Luna and him finding his own way with that, and where Ellis is going to go, because he did just blow up on a car.
Yeah.
Let's be traced back to him.
Yeah. So, yeah. And then like also for Jackson, maybe finding his own voice and finding his own who he is, because it is difficult having a parent that is so bright and everyone is drawn to them. Like you mentioned too, like in our pregame, bright like the sun. Yeah. Everyone's drawn to him.
Yeah, that's what Jackson says. He's like, you're like the sun. It's not that you're doing this on purpose, but everyone is just attracted to you. And that does something to me, as the person in the shadows.
Yeah, it's hard to follow sometimes. And sometimes as a child of the brightest parent, or having parents that are very outgoing, it is difficult if you're not as outgoing or you're quieter.
Right. Yeah. It can be an odd comparison that, instead of people talking about your kid and, they're talking about
your parents.
Instead of, they're like, oh, yeah, what did your parent do? And you're like, well, I'm the one that's like, shouldn't you be asking about me? Kind of. So,
or you're so-and-so's kid, or you're, I know you because of.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a very strange dynamic. I don't much relate to it. I don't have like my mom was kind of very much, center stage, but she also had a very shy side to her. Okay. But I don't know. To me, I was like, I don't want that. I was very much, I don't think it was that much. It wasn't really the same dynamic.
Yeah.
So
I came from 2 extremely outgoing parents. So it's, it's hard, it's but my mom wasn't like, she was friends with everybody in the world. And my dad, I always say, like, he's mayor of wherever he lives, because they're both extremely outgoing, extroverted personalities. So for me, I don't always want to be extroverted. Sometimes I do, but it is difficult if you come from a family with very loud, outgoing personalities or very extroverted personalities, and you're like, maybe I don't want to be center of attention.
Yeah, maybe it's too much. It's just not you. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's just kind of one of the many, maybe disconnects, things that the father-son have to keep working on, Ellis and Jackson. And, and it is, let's point out the obvious. It is really, if you're a Rob Lowe fan, it's really cool to see him working with his real life son.
Yeah.
Right? That's a really cool dynamic.
And holy camole. I know he does all those Atkin commercials, but this guy, holy cow. I mean, he's like, he has to be like almost 60.
Yeah.
He looks like he's seriously like 30. It's crazy.
He's lovely. He just is. It's lovely. Rob Lowe is just like I don't know. He's a forever beauty. He's just.
It's just an anomaly. It's really strange. Like, just because you see the other people from like the Rat Pack or whatever, the Brat Pack, not the Rat Pack. That was Frank Sinatra. They had that group, but the Brat Pack, like he seems like he's aged like the best.
Yeah, and it really is not. I mean, like, this is my own personal opinion, not really knowing much on this, so my completely crappy, uneducated opinion. But he doesn't look like he's had like any plastic surgery done
No,
Or
like
if he has very minimal. I don't know.
yeah, because I watch him on that show, like The Floor, and it doesn't seem like, he looks like he's aging, but it doesn't look like he's like, yeah, it doesn't look like he's all like pulled. It doesn't look like his face is all pulled back.
Cat like, yeah, weird. Yeah. Yeah, it's very, I mean, and I'm just saying that about celebrities that go too far.
Yeah, there's a lot that are just like, you're like, woo, stop it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I could think of a few.
Yeah, but he's just a sight. I enjoy looking at him and watching him. And his son has like kind of some similar, I wonder if they have a similar dynamic in real life. If it's, because Rob Lowe is so well known and, and not to say like John Owen, he was a great he's a great actor. And I think he was really good. He even directed this along with his dad. But I wonder if there's maybe been some similar feelings that they could really relate to. Right?
Yeah. And maybe I mean, I don't know if they wrote it too. I know they produced it, but there probably is a lot of similarities. I know I watched I can't remember what the show was. There was a show with Rob Lowe and his two sons, and they were like traveling and stuff like that. They were filming it. I think it was only on for like one season, but it was kind of neat to watch the different dynamics between the three of them.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I thought it was a nice show. I would definitely watch the second season. I think there's some really interesting dynamics. I thought it was pretty funny too. I think it had some funny.
Yeah, it was really funny. It was a good show. I thought it was really well written, and I thought it was neat too because I don't usually picture. I know he probably has. I think he did like, was it The Community or something like that? Or so I did.
Yeah.
I didn't see it, but I don't really usually think of Rob Lowe as a comic. I always because again, I'm stuck in like 1980 something. I always think of like St. Elmo's Fire and stuff like that and Outsiders. But it is hard for me to think of him as a comedian, but he's really funny.
He is. And he's got it's like an endearing humor, I think,
Yeah.
It's really like he can kind of say anything and he's, let's face it, the man's like, he's gorgeous. Okay. And,
Tanya does not hide her crushes. I'm sure.
I know. He's beautiful. He's lovely. I mean, just look at him. He's, I don't know. He's a sight. And, I think that sometimes that can kind of take away from the humor, but I think it adds a charm to it for him. And that's kind of a rare quality, at least in my opinion. So I love that with him. And I think he is very funny. He can deliver very well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was we liked this series. Check it out. It wasn't really, I think it kind of flew under the radar. I didn't really know much about it, but
yeah. And it does have some nice mental health components. I mean, I know, what is his name? Fred
Armisen.
Yeah. He's so funny, but he's not a good depiction of what a real therapist is, but he's such a funny actor. But it is nice so that they do talk about mental health themes that do need to be talked about. And
yeah. He doesn't portray them very well, like boundaries and
and wanted to have Sundays with your client and just becoming friends and
that's you. And then a part of getting him off the board in the end. Like it was just such a weird dynamic.
Yeah, so many ethical violations.
Yeah. But it was fun. We liked it, obviously
I would recommend it.
Recommend that for therapy, but as a therapist, but whatever. It was so we're not advertising for Netflix. We just love this. We just looking at different shows or so when we're saying check it out, it's just because we liked it.
And we always say this, but if there's a show or a movie or anything that you've seen or that you want us to maybe talk about that might have a psychological or mental health, or there's a really good therapist in it, like there's some shows that have like a really good therapy portrayal. Like, I always think of like, certain shows. I'm like, wow, they did it right. Or this one's so off base.
Yeah.
So that might be fun for us to talk about too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Let us know. But we hope you enjoyed this. And don't forget to leave us comments. Let us know if you have suggestions for future episodes, whether it's a movie or not, or a series or not. We like other ideas as well. Yeah. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Wicked Psychotherapists. On Facebook, we are The Wicked Psychotherapists. Subscribe and follow wherever you can listen to podcasts. We're everywhere.
We are. You can even go on the web and watch or listen.
Yes. We're ubiquitous. That's the SAT word of the day.
Oh, I like that.
We're everywhere. All right. Well, yeah, leave us a review. Leave us any suggestions. We'd love to hear from you. But thanks for listening. And don't forget, stay wicked.
And keep your mind well. Okay. Well, bye-bye.
All right, guys. Take care. We'll see you next time.